chapter 9 on muscles, on the physiology of muscles. And one of the things that we've talked about in class is muscle tone, state of muscle. So basically we all know that we strive for muscle tone, and you want to have good muscle tone, but it keeps your muscles really firm and ready to respond to any stimuli. It looks good too, but it's very, very healthy for the muscles. You also have spinal reflexes that account for muscle tone. And so what those spinal reflexes are doing is they are responding to the activation of stretch receptors. And so if it's toned, they're constantly responding and activating one motor unit after another. Now there are two different types of contractions that your muscles can make, and there's going to be a picture after each. The first is isotonic, and isotonic contractions are where the muscle changes in length. And that's what we always think of. If you're going to contract your bicep, the muscle itself is shortening, and it's going to move some sort of load. And so this is the picture of it. So you've got your normal muscle here, and you're going to actually move the load, and in this case it's a 3 kilogram, I guess, weight, and the muscle is actually shortening, so you're tensing that muscle. Then there's something called isometric contractions, and that is where the tension increases in a muscle, but the muscle is not shortening or lengthening. And so if I were to do a wall sit, and I'm going to hold that position. So you have to shorten the muscle in order to get into that seated position. But then once you hold it there, you're still tensing the muscle, but it's not shortening or lengthening. So in this case, the muscle is contracting, but it's not shortening. Now, in biology, we talk about anaerobic and aerobic respiration and lactic acid fermentation and all of that. Well, in your actual cell, there's a process called glycolysis, and glycolysis is the way that our body breaks down a glucose molecule. And so glycolysis itself is an anaerobic process. There's no oxygen needed for that glucose molecule to cut into 2 pyruvic acids. But once that happens, once glycolysis occurs, if there's not enough oxygen in the bloodstream, or in the cell, I should say, then we're going to go through something called lactic acid fermentation. If there is oxygen present, then we're going to go into cellular respiration and produce ATP in the mitochondria. But when sometimes our muscles are going to actually fatigue, and we don't have enough oxygen to continue to go through cellular respiration. So what happens is we start to make something called lactic acid. And what lactic acid does is it still allows us, or lactic acid fermentation, still allows us to make ATP when oxygen is not present. It just doesn't let us make as much ATP. And so what happens to that lactic acid is it gets into the fibers of your muscles, causing that muscle soreness. We've all had lactic acid buildup and our muscles have been sore. But that lactic acid has to then be processed somehow in the body. So it diffuses into the bloodstream, and it's going to mainly be picked up and used as fuel in the liver, kidneys, and heart. So what happens is it's going to go into the liver. It's going to then be converted back into pyruvic acid by something called the Cori cycle. So in the liver, it's going to be converted back into that pyruvic acid that was originally formed by the process of glycolysis. And this Cori cycle allows us to then reuse that pyruvic acid in order to then go through cellular respiration if oxygen is present. Then we have these special satellite cells that are kind of floating around, and they're going to repair damaged muscle cells. They're just kind of repair cells or specialized stem cells. And then muscle fatigue. Now, our muscles have all gotten fatigued before, but full muscle fatigue is if you're really undergoing fatigue, you cannot contract that muscle any longer. It literally cannot contract because we don't have enough ATP in our system to keep up with the ATP use of a muscle. And so what happens is, lactic acid can start to build up. But true muscle fatigue is literally that muscle will stop working. And so if you've ever, been lifting weights and you literally can't pick up that weight, that is pure muscle fatigue, not enough ATP for muscle contraction. Now you have different types of muscle fiber speeds. And so we have something called slow oxidative fibers, and they contract slowly, and it takes a long time for those to fatigue. They have a lot of resistance, and so they can continue to contract very slowly. Then you have fast oxidative fibers, which contract very quickly, and it says moderate resistance to fatigue. So these are going to fatigue much faster than those slow oxidative fibers. And then finally, fast glycolytic fibers contract quickly and have fast myosin ATPases, and they're going to be easily fatigued. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that and the coloration of those fibers. Now, unfortunately, there are some muscle conditions and diseases which can actually destroy the muscle, and we're going to just talk about a couple of those. But one of the most, well-known group of muscle-destroying diseases is called muscular dystrophy. And what happens is the muscle itself is, the muscle fibers start to atrophy. Atrophy in a muscle just means they start to reduce in size, and fat and connective tissue deposits start to fill in the spaces. And when that happens, fat and connective tissue are unable to contract. They're not muscles, so that muscle stops being able to contract. There is one type of muscular dystrophy we're going to talk about, and it's called Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and it's an inherited muscular dystrophy, and it's sex-linked. So it's carried by females. Females can have it, but more men always will express sex-linked diseases, and we talked about that in biology. It's usually diagnosed between the ages of 2 to 10, and unfortunately their muscles start to fail fairly quickly. Now, after death, our muscles actually will contract. If you've ever been out in the desert, hiking or whatever, sometimes you'll actually see this in animals that have recently died. So what happens is after death, calcium is released slowly because there's nothing that's stopping the release of that calcium. So your body is just, everything is kind of draining out. And what happens is the myosin actually has one power stroke left in it. We have enough ATP for the myosin heads to bind and actually contract, but not enough ATP to then release the myosin heads. And so what happens is, depending on the person and everything that's going on, 12 to 24 hours post-mortem, that means after death, there will be a full contraction, meaning all of your muscles are going to contract at once. But then you have some enzymes that are going to come in and break this down, and it's going to cause the myosin heads to release. And so the entire body, or all of those myosin heads, will release within 72 hours of death. And so people can tell kind of about how long somebody has been dead by this process.